Hi, welcome to Math for All. This is our next lesson where we will exploring factoring. In this case, we will be looking at factoring a difference of squares, where a difference of squares really represents two numbers, so it's a binomial with the first term and the second term that can be squared and are separated with a minus sign. So there must be a minus sign, and then you will be able to factor out a term such as this. If there was a plus sign, this binomial would not be factorable. So let's look at our first example. We can see that this term is squared, and the 36 is really 6 squared. So if you were to factor this, you can see that we have a letter and a number. What we're going to do is we're going to write our letter first, the way it appears here, as if it wasn't squared. And then this number we'll write second, as if it wasn't squared also. Now, in order for us to have a negative sign, here's what we have to remember, is that when we multiplied binomials, we took the first number, multiplied it by each of the two numbers within the second bracket, and then we took our second number and multiplied it by each of the terms in the second bracket also. And then the result was, I don't know if you remember, but the result was we had 3 terms, usually some number. So some number, and then x squared, and then a number x, and then just a number. In this case, we don't have our third term. We don't have the middle term. And so in order for us to eliminate it, our signs should be opposite. So when we have 2 terms as our final answer, we need to make sure that when we multiply binomials, that the middle term is a plus and a minus. For our second example, we have the number 25 and we have an x squared. So we know automatically that 25, if we were to take the square root of 25, we would get 5. So 5 squared is 25, and x squared is also a square. And so we can use the idea of the difference of squares in terms of factoring. So we'll write our 2 brackets. In order to eliminate the middle term, we're going to have a plus sign and a minus sign. And then we'll just copy down the numbers as they appear here. So we're going to have 5, we'll have x, 5, x, and we're done. Okay, so in this case we're going to look at our next example. In this case we're going to factor trinomials, and factoring is really the opposite of expanding. And so this would be a trinomial where we have 3 terms. This would be an example of expanding. So we have x plus 4 multiplied by x minus 3. Let's see what happens. We'll get our answer, and then we'll try to factor out that answer to get these 2 terms from that expression. So once again, we multiply the first term by the next 2 terms. We're going to get x squared, and then negative 3x. When we multiply 4 by x and 4 by negative 3, we get positive 4x, and we get negative 12. Okay, let's link like terms together. What do we get? X squared stays as is. The x's can be combined together, and we'll get positive 1x. We don't really have to write the 1, and so we'll just write x minus 12, and this would be our expression. Now the question is, if we had to factor something like this, our answer should be that. So how do we do it? Well, there are a number of different ways of doing it. I'm going to show you one method today. And so the number in front of this x is the number 1. So I'm going to write down all the possibilities where we can take different numbers and multiply them together to get the number 1. So in this case, it's just 1 times 1. Here we have the number 12, and it has multiple possibilities. It can be 12 times 1. It can be 6 times 2, 4 times 3, 3 times 4, 2 and 6, and 1 and 12. In this case, as you can see right here, it doesn't really matter what these terms are because our first two numbers are the same, so that will not have an impact on our answer, but we'll see how this applies later on. Let's see what happens here. So the reason we wrote down all these numbers is because we actually want to do it in such a way that when we multiply across, so we would multiply number 1 across by any of these numbers, and then when we add them together with the numbers, when we multiply this number by any of these numbers up at the top, we're supposed to get the number that's here in the middle, the number 1. And so the only possibility that we're left with is, it won't be this one because 1 times 1 is 1, and that's 12. Doesn't matter how you put them together. Whether you add them together, you'll get 13, or subtract them and you'll get 11. You will not get the number 1. Here, number 2 and number 6, whether you add them or subtract them, you will not get the number 1. But the number 4 and 3 do match, and so we know that these are the numbers that we're going to use as our final answer. In fact, we can just go ahead and circle our top answer, circle our second answer, and then input our brackets. So we're going to write our first bracket, our second one, and we're going to write everything down the way it appears. So our first bracket has 1 and 4. Instead of 1, we're going to put x, 4, 1 and 3. So x and 3. Now we just have to figure out the signs. Our answer says that so the middle number is positive and the last number is negative. In order for us to get negative 12, I hope you remember, when we multiply a positive and a negative number, our final answer becomes negative. And that's what we're going to try and do. We're going to have a positive sign and a negative sign. Because the middle number is positive, our biggest number between these two numbers, our greatest number, has to be positive. And our smaller one is going to be negative. Because when we're multiplying, you can see that our middle numbers here are really formed by taking the first letter and multiplying it by that number, and then the number multiplying it by this letter. And so this number has to be positive, and this one has to be negative. For our next example, we're going to look at the trinomial that we had presented originally. In this case, we have x squared minus 10x plus 16. And the question is now, how do we factor this without already knowing what the answer is going to be? So once again, we're going to write down our numbers. There's the number 1 in front of x. So the only possibility of getting a 1 is by taking 1 and multiplying it by 1. For 16, there are multiple possibilities. We can have 16 and 1. We can have 8 and 2, 4 and 4, and the rest of the possibilities won't matter because it will be the same numbers but flipped. It won't matter because we have two identical numbers over here. So, what numbers do we multiply together in order to get negative 10? Well, we can see that the 10, when we add these numbers together or subtract them, the closest one that we can come up with is the number 8 as well as the number 2. All we have to do now is draw our brackets to these two numbers and record them in our expression here. So we'll have, instead of 1, we're going to put x. So we're going to put x and 8, x and 2. And now at the end we just have to figure out the signs. So this one's negative and that one's positive. In order for us to get a positive sign, we can either multiply a positive number by a positive number, or we can multiply a negative number by a negative number. Since the middle number is negative, both of our signs are going to be negative. And we can clearly see this because x times negative 2 gives us negative 2x, and negative 8 times x will give us negative 8x. When you put them together, you're going to get negative 10x. And that's where that number comes from.